Today, I'm joined by AJ Kumar, who is a digital maestro. Now, that is a big term, but when you hear the credentials of AJ, you'll understand why. AJ is the founder of the Limitless Company, which is a studio system for influencers. And that's one of the topics that we're going to go deep into in this conversation. AJ and his team are on a mission to help entrepreneurs in the creator economy build for-profit human healing brands. And I want to understand a little bit from AJ what a human healing brand is, because that is intriguing and sounds very much up my street. So we're going to go there too. AJ's been helping corporate brands, the likes of Salesforce and Mint, as well as, and this is really interesting, personal brands, people like Neil Patel, Nikki Haskell, and Kimberly Snyder, nonetheless. And we are going to go, hopefully, into some topics about how to build an influencer brand. Now, this might be something that you feel, oh, yes, of course, you know, there are influencers and there are influencers, but we're going to explore some of the best practice and some of the ways that, irrespective of how big, how global, how vast you want to get, there's some really good practice here for building brand. So welcome to the show, AJ.
Thanks so much for having me, Neil.
Now, I'm
across the pond.
Yeah, and I've kind of pitched you as this kind of huge sort of entity who's capable of creating magic from nothing. And yeah, have I set the bar too high here? Because this is a complicated topic, isn't it? Let's face it.
Let's see if I can meet that standard. I think I can. Let's deliver.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm in the UK and you're in Los Angeles at the moment. So, we're working on some really interesting time zone dynamics here. But it's quite late in the day for me and early in the day for you. But we'll see whether time zone becomes irrelevant in this world of influencer marketing.
I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all operating in the present moment. So the time zones kind of get blurred to some extent, I think.
They do. And I guess once you're on this journey of, building brand, be it for your own business or personally, you're tapping into a global audience just by default, aren't you? It's very difficult to be an influencer, thought leader, specialist, guru, or digital maestro and just be talking to a local community. I mean, is that kind of one of the starting points in the mindset for somebody who's looking to kind of build a brand, just the recognition that you're global as soon as you step into this kind of field?
Yeah, especially right now where virtually everyone has smartphones and access to the internet. It's sort of hard to just appeal to a local community when you realize that there are people interested in what you're talking about all over the world. And not everybody may make sense, but a lot of people do. So we're in a really interesting time where there's more opportunity now than ever.
Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? I think, whether you're US based, UK, elsewhere in the world, it just feels that there's some real relevance to be, I guess, if you're a consumer or a customer, aligning yourselves with people who are specialists, they're thought leaders, they're people you're going to get good value from. And I'm assuming that, we're talking here when we talk about the word influencer, which can be with an uppercase I, or it could be with a lowercase I if you're pitching that little bit lower. We're looking about value add, aren't we? Because when we talk influencer, a lot of people think Kardashians, The Rock, and these kind of sort of uber influencers who, literally every other consumer in the world has heard of. The kind of consumers, the kind of influencers rather, that kind of you've been working with and talking to, they're a little bit more focused than that, aren't they? They're kind of looking at sort of various markets and various kind of offers and very, very specific value. Is that kind of where you see yourself kind of aligning personally? Because, that there is a pattern really with the kind of people you've been working with.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of the people I work with, I define them as subject matter experts. So it's true that the term influencer kind of got watered down, I believe, in the last decade or so. But in reality, influencers have been around for a long time. If you think about people like the Oprahs, the Marthas, the Ellens, I would consider them to be influencers. When you think about influencers, really what you're talking about is somebody that has the ability to influence someone's thoughts, behaviors, right? Way of doing something. So I think that term has been changed a lot. And I think that term is going to change a lot and evolve going forward as well.
How do you see that evolving?
Well, it's because a lot of people don't like associating with influencers, right? Like I've seen videos of people like a Logan Paul, which is like more of a classic influencer in today's marketplace. But even he feels embarrassed. Like there's a clip of him saying like, "Oh, I don't really want to identify as being an influencer." Because the term influencer in the market space, I think, has been generalized. When you think of influencer, you think of somebody on Instagram and taking photos, you know, whether it's like beach photos or food photos. And that's kind of how it got mixed up and washed out. But I believe that there are levels to being an influencer. And I started creating something called the influencer hierarchy, which are the different levels of influencers you could become. And this is something I realized over time, because I've been in social media, digital marketing for about over 15 years now. And when I first got into the space, I was lucky enough to have a friend that was already in the internet marketing space, a guy named Neil Patel. And Neil basically introduced me to the digital world, right? Like he's the one that first helped me understand and develop digital world skills. Whereas previously I was learning real world skills. I dropped out of college. I went straight into sales and just learning how to communicate. I was 17, 18 years old, communicating with like 30, 40, 50-year-old real estate agents. I had a cousin who was teaching me real world skill sets, right? And that's just becoming an effective communicator, learning how to talk to people, learning how to close deals. And then meeting Neil helped me understand the digital world, taught me how to blog, taught me how Google works, how SEO works. And then eventually he introduced me to his cousin Sujin, and we started an SEO agency called Single Grain. This was back around like 2010. So I did that for a few years, and we were working with a lot of great corporate brands. It was phenomenal. I was in San Francisco, in Soma, almost living like what seemed like a dream to me. And at some point, I started realizing that I didn't have an affinity for working with corporate brands at that time. And I started gravitating towards people, personal brands, because I had done that in my previous experience. It could also be my Indian heritage, where I grew up around gurus. So naturally, I started being attracted to people that are gurus. And I partnered up with a woman named Kimberly Snyder. And at that time, that concept of influencer was really brand new and didn't really exist. But Kimberly, to me, she was an author. She had a blog that was getting 30,000 visitors a month. And then I was able to apply these corporate digital marketing strategies and took her blog from 30,000 visitors a month to 500,000 visitors a month. And my mind just like opened up. It was a whole new experience for me. And at that time, I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I was trying to essentially model what I had seen in the world of something that's familiar. So I was looking at Oprah, Ellen, Martha Stewart. Those to me were like the people that all of these influencers were trying to become. So by looking at what they were doing in the real world with traditional media, I was applying into the digital world with new media. So doing that with Kimberly, with Google traffic and creating content for her for social traffic, even creating strategically creating infographics. Like, for example, I saw this thing on a show. It was a Dr. Oz show where he talks about what your poop and pee mean. And I took that concept and created an infographic with Kimberly about here's what your poop and pee mean. And it's all these graphics, all these images. Obviously, it's tastefully done. It's not like a gross thing, right? But it was tastefully done. And we posted that on one of her blog pages, and it did extremely well. People shared it on social media. It got a lot of Google traffic. It was ranking for all sorts of keywords. And that kind of became the concept with how new media worked at that time. But over time, over the last like 10, 12, 13, 14 years, people started switching from using laptops to smartphones. And that's where my eye was as well. I knew the smartphone was really powerful. I knew it was going to be revolutionary. And I knew that video, just like every marketer for the last decade knew, that everything was shifting into video. So naturally, I started applying what I was doing with Kimberly, which I was orchestrating all these digital experts that were playing what I call instruments. But, in reality, it's your smartphone, it's your laptops, it's your keyboards, it's your mice. And then Kimberly being the talent. And I'm orchestrating all these players behind the scenes, graphic artists, developers, bloggers, writers, all of these people that were essentially part of the orchestra into creating what I call an integrated brand experience. So by doing that with Kimberly, having the success with her, having helped her build this multi-million-dollar empire, I realized I was onto something. So I essentially took what I did with her and I turned it into a playbook. And then I started applying that playbook with other people. Now, it was really difficult just because the amount of time that goes into building a business around someone's personal brand. So I did it again with another singular person. It was a guy from TV. And I helped him launch his, what's now called a personality-driven media company. So I helped him launch that. And then 2020 came around and I realized my model was slightly flawed because I was only able to do it with one person at a time. So I started switching things up. And then in 2020, I rebranded as the Limitless Company. And I also zeroed my focus in on video, just because video was everything. And the pandemic happened and everybody was confused and everybody didn't know what was going on. But for me, it almost felt like everybody fell into the digital world, which is the world I was in, like primarily, right? Whereas everybody else was in the real world. And once that started to happen, I was like, hey, look, I'm going to double down. I'm going to triple down on this short form vertical video content. And then essentially I molded my company into becoming now, which is an end-to-end studio system that helps influencers build their brands online.
Wow. And that's properly listening to the audience and properly listening to the progress that you were making rather than just, blindly sort of just forging forward and irrespective of, the kind of the progress or irrespective of how the market's moving, just carrying on doing the same thing. That creation of the playbook, as you described it, I mean, that was a genius moment, really, wasn't it? Because you had then the template that was able to be replicated because you knew with confidence that if you're doing it with Kimberly, I can do it with you and I can do it with you. And then it's scalable, isn't it? That process of doing it becomes then predictable. There's a real power in that predictability, isn't there? That must have felt so good when you realized I'm onto something here and the world is now kind of almost magnetically coming in my direction because of, global situation as it was at the time. That must have been so exciting.
It was. And like, I'm speaking about like a 10-year time period. So as it was exciting, but at the same time, it was also frustrating in the sense that I'm trying to take all this and then turn it into like something that is duplicatable and it is predictable. And it did take a long time and a lot of it was really frustrating, but it was powerful in that sense that I felt confident knowing that this is the future, this is the way, and I feel good about putting everything into this. And that's exactly what I did. And it took a while to get into the motion and get into the swing of things, but I was finally able to build this infrastructure that allows me to create this content at scale. And it was very, as I was doing it, it was a very akin to to restaurants and food. So when I think of content creation, I think of it as very similar to food. And when I'm creating these videos, it's almost like fast videos is almost like fast food. And similarly, you could have unhealthy food and you could have unhealthy videos or toxic videos that spread misinformation and spread lies and just isn't good for people. And then you could have nutritionable food and content, and that could also benefit people. So when we talk about the idea of human healing brands, and we talk about creating content in a way that makes people laugh, that makes people learn something. And all of those are forms of healing. And if we're doing that every single day and we're reaching millions and millions of people across the network, it's exciting to me because I could genuinely feel that impact that makes sense.
So is that when you say human healing brands, this is about facilitating through your process of short form video, the spreading and the dissemination of love, basically, and of empathy and of kind of wholesome living. And so you would only really see this model working if it kind of helps your brands that you're working with and these personal brands that you're representing to do better in the world. It feels it's very much about mindfulness and well-being for everyone, really. So it's kind of a win-win, it feels.
100%. And I do work with a lot of clients in like the health and wellness space or in the entertainment space. And it's like, you could see when you start looking at the content, like, for example, there's one of my clients is a woman named Nikki Haskell, and she's 83 years old. She's known today as a grandfluencer. So if you watch her content, you'll see it's pretty funny. It's like we took her area of interest and blended it with all these other areas of interest. And now she's getting millions of views a month. She's a grandfluencer. She's hot in Australia. She's in the UK. She's in the US, and she's making an impact to where, especially with younger women, right? Her audience demo tends to be like Gen Z and millennial women. And every day she tells me, hey, this person came to me and said how much they loved my videos, or this person came to me and told me how inspired they are, right? So that kind of stuff happens all the time. And that's honestly what this whole thing is about, right? And those kind of results, because then those kind of results ultimately lead to that, that big outcome that I want.
So again, sort of just trying to play back in terms of somebody watching or listening to this and thinking, hey, this is really interesting because I could do that. I could be part of this. I could, ask AJ to help me. Or it feels like there's almost like some secret ingredients in here that mean that this is going to work better than just pure chance. So one is obviously the process, the system that you've created. But it also feels then that there's something in here in terms of the value that these brands are conveying to the world. Because I guess, and you can correct me, I mean, you're the expert on this influencer piece, but my interpretation of influencer is the fact that I can play one of two games. I can either do good or I can be controversial, because I'm going to get the eyeballs and the attention if I do one or other of those things. I can be an influencer who's rattling the cage of other people. I'm going into the ring with somebody and it's going to make this a box office event or whatever. And we've seen a lot of influencers kind of stepping into the boxing ring, for example, to just, kind of get that kind of traction. But then there's also these personal human healing brands that you're talking about here who are consciously doing good, and they're getting attention too. Is it kind of almost like a choice? If somebody says, okay, well, I'm representing a business here, so I've got this brand I need to kind of be custodian of. I can either be super controversial, I can go head to head with my competitors, or I can simply look for where I can give huge amounts of value, and that in itself will be at least good enough. In fact, probably even better. Is it kind of like a binary choice here? Is it kind of one or other, or am I missing a trick and there are other alternatives?
I love the way you think. Yeah, it is that. It is about intentionally creating, knowing that your action has a reaction, right? So to kind of to what you're talking about, I've developed a value model for content creation, because for the longest time, a lot of people created content and then they would stop. They wouldn't really see that immediate result, right? Most marketers are familiar with direct response, where it's, you do ads, you get a return on your ad spend, you create this, it results in that. But when it comes to organic content creation, it's different, right? Like, people know that there's an ad ecosystem that exists, and we're trained from birth, from growing up, that commercials are, someone's trying to sell you something, you're more guarded, you're more skeptical about when you see anything that's sponsored. Whereas the organic ecosystem, which I believe is like the default ecosystem, it's reality, right? The internet is already augmenting people's reality. When you go on social media, the way you see somebody, that changes and alters the way you think of them, what you think of them in real life. So knowing that kind of those kind of mechanisms already in place, we developed a model called ROAC, return on attention created, because the creator economy is something that was birthed from the attention economy. The attention economy has already been around, right? Like that's the economy that a lot of us in the internet space have already been in. A lot of enterprise companies have been in for decades. But now you start to see a lot more of the creator economy, which is something that came about as a result of all these social media platforms and regular everyday people having a channel. And if you think about it from a different perspective, all these social media channels are ultimately a network, right? Very similarly to growing up when you have TV networks and you have TV channels and so on and so forth. So when you realize that there's a landscape that now exists that levels the playing field to where only some people had access to that for the last 60, 70 years, right? With TV land. But on internet land, everyone has access to it. And now with billions of people that have smartphone devices, anybody could garner attention. They could accumulate attention over time, right? All these platforms, people always talk about how to beat the algorithm this, how to beat the algorithm that. But in reality, all these platforms have these algorithms which you could leverage to maximize attention. And when you have that attention, it's what you do with it, right? When you have people like Logan Paul who, you know, went to that forest in Japan and like everybody got pissed when he did that and they were so upset and it was such a bad and negative thing, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to today. Now he's on WWE and everybody loves watching him. He's super entertaining. So you could think of that as a value in a way where he's solving people's problem of boredom. He's entertaining people, right? So attention could be valuable in a lot of different ways. Yes, you could use it in a way that could alter people's minds, that could spread misinformation, that could teach them wrong things. And yeah, you could also give them value of where you're entertaining them. You could give them value where you're teaching them something. So that all these platforms they have algorithms that have these serendipity engines where they want you to discover content that benefits that user. And if you could create content in a way that does that, then it's only going to get the algorithm to show you to more and more people so that you create more and more attention. And that return on attention that you create is the value. That ROAC could be quantitative value or qualitative value. Typically, when you're first creating content, you're going to get more qualitative value. You're not going to really get the results of making tons of money right away. But in the beginning, you will start to create a narrative. You will start to create a way that people perceive you so that in real life, in reality, it helps you in some way, shape, or form, right? It's like people are familiar with people that go on TV and then they become like larger than life characters so that when they meet people in real life, it alters the way people interact with them. Same thing happens with smartphone, right? It's similar. It's not the same as TV. It's not the same 30-minute, 60-minute show or a 2-hour movie, but it's similar. It's a different way of doing things, right? It's like when you take dating apps, it's like you're swiping left and right. It's new, it's different. There was something similar back in the days where you had like newspaper ads, right? I don't know if they had it in America, but I know in India they had newspaper ads where people would see somebody's photo and what they're about and then potentially get married with them. So it's like, it's similar to stuff from the past, but it's new. So now you're watching these 30-second shows, these 15-second shows, these 60-second shows. And it's not just about doing it once. You got to do it over and over and over again. One big lesson I learned from Neil Patel, he's one of the best marketers in the world. And one thing that he's always been is consistent. He's been consistently blogging for over a decade now, nonstop. And that has resulted in him growing this powerhouse of an agency. He has one of the top digital advertising agencies in the world. It's called NP Digital. And he works with some of the biggest enterprise clients. And he's been consistent. That's been a big part, a major part in the results that he's got. It sounds simple, it sounds fundamental, and it is, but it's also very hard. So when you think about creating video content, today, it's like the average person spends 2.5 hours on social media every day. 2.5 hours. Within that 2.5 hour span, someone's consuming hundreds of pieces of content a day. So it's always interesting to me when I come across people that are like, oh, it's too late. Social media has been around, too long. Everybody's an influencer, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, all these people that are trying to create content, all these people that are trying to become content creators are stuck in like a hamster wheel where they have to constantly create content. If they don't, like, they have to succumb to the death of irrelevancy. And that's why I created the Limitless Company, is to help streamline the content creation operations for the creators so that they could be consistent. But when you could be consistent, you could have a piece of content every single day that people are consuming, right? Because what happens over time is it's like the toothbrush test, where if someone's doing something every single day, they start to build a habit for it, just like you brush your teeth or just like you eat food. Content creation, I see, is the same way. If someone could consume your content every single day, it just becomes a habit. They start to expect it. They start to salivate for it, and they start to remember you for it. Then it becomes, so if you could do the consistency part, then it becomes how you're positioning yourself to be in the minds of these people that are consuming your content, because you could alter that, you could change that. And that's why I work with subject matter experts, because ultimately I'm helping them be positioned in the minds of consumers via social media as an authority, and then becoming famous for that authority, which I call a guru.
So there's a key word here that I just want to re-emphasize for everybody listening: patience. This is one of the hardest things, isn't it? I mean, you could be talking as, example with Neil there. And I think, the vast majority of the audience listening to this will know who Neil Patel is, because you're probably using one of his tools online, one of his free tools, because they are genius and they work and they open up a whole new world to you. If you haven't, check out Neil Patel online. You'll find him just by searching Neil Patel. Yeah. So that's who we're talking about here. But I think that the really interesting thing there is the patience that's required, because and a lot of commentators sort of would support you on this one, AJ, because it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're forced almost commercially, particularly if we're representing somebody else, to see a short-term result, to see a short-term gain. You've got to see progress, and that becomes one of the key performance indicators of how successful we are. And yet what we're talking about and advocating here is super patience, really long-term patience. We're not talking months. We're not even talking years. We could be talking decades to get to where you want to be. All these overnight successes are probably 10, 15 years in the making. And that for some people is just way too long. They just do not have the stoicism, the staying power, just the desire, I guess, to wait that long. And I think it's going to be a real challenge, isn't it? Is the patience the thing that sorts the winners from the losers ultimately?
Yeah, just like how you said it, the staying power, it makes such a big difference, because oftentimes it's like that whole, I think it's a book, Think and Grow Rich, where it's like the guy that was 3 feet from gold. And that concept very much applies to this, where it's like, if you just stick with it long enough, then it's going to start to work. I mean, obviously you're not just doing the same thing over and over again. It's very much like software, where it's an iterative process. When you're trying to build your brand online, that's really what it's about. The beauty of today is that you get feedback so quickly, right? Like when I mentioned like the Oprahs, the Ellens, Martha Stewart, those are massive brands. Those are massive companies. It's not necessarily saying that you're going to be that, right? Kimberly wasn't Oprah, but she just became like a mini version of that. And building a multi-million-dollar business is pretty sweet. It's not $100 million business, but it just depends how much you're willing to put. But it is true in that it takes time, and it takes that sticking power, and then it requires you iterating it, just like software.
And how much is enough? Because you talk there about, $1 million business would be great, $100 million business would be great. These are they're all relative, aren't they? They're relative scales. To somebody, having $1 million business would be, wow, beyond my wildest dreams. To somebody else, it will be like, nah, I just need to get to that by the end of this year. Is there kind of a benchmark here? Because it's the same with followers, isn't it, really? I'm musing here over this whole thing about what is actually enough. It's a very personal thing, isn't it? If I've got 100 people who are listening to my every word and acting and behaving, and they become my advocates and the word spreads that way, to me, that would be way more powerful than having 1 million followers, but actually they just swipe through every time they see a piece of content on their timeline. What is a kind of a relevant sort of indicator here of actually this is going in the right direction? Because if I've got to wait 10 years before I get some, let's call it success, I've got to start to see some kind of progress, haven't I? Is like 10 followers enough to demonstrate that? Do I need 1,000? I mean, where are the benchmarks here?
Yeah, it's true. It does depend on what you're trying to achieve. A lot of people like the idea of having 1 million followers or 2 million followers or whatever it is. But in reality, do you really need that to accomplish your goals? Or is it that you're just trying to pursue something based off of like an ego thing, right? More often than not, it's an ego thing. Like in reality, you could have 50,000 followers, you could have 100,000 followers and make a significant impact on your business, or a couple 100,000 followers, or you could have a couple $100,000 and not make a serious impact on your business, right? It also depends on the quality and your niche. So what I'm getting at here is that there's a strategy that has to happen beforehand to what you're trying to achieve. So when you get clear on that strategy, then it makes sense. Okay, I need 50,000 followers, 100,000 followers, etc. Today, those numbers are important. Like I know for the last decade or so, a lot of people just saw those followers and whatnot as vanity metrics. And to some extent they were, because a lot of people were buying followers or faking followers or whatever. But then, with the growth of TikTok and with more people paying attention to YouTubers, you start to realize, oh, there are real people that follow these people legitimately, right? And when that happens, it does lead to new opportunities, because you could think of it as the same as airtime, right? You have content that people are paying attention to, and then you could commercialize that content so that you could push forward the products and services that you're selling or you're recommending. And that could ultimately, help you generate the kind of income that you want to have the business and the lifestyle that you want.
Where do you see things like, a lot of people obviously for clear reasons are talking about, impact of AI in this space, and, in terms of, creation of content, either as an influencer, thought leader, specialist, the use of AI being kind of almost like a regeneration of something at the moment that already exists. In other words, it's a collation of data and information that already exists, maybe slightly different with imagery and with videos, but certainly in the written word, it's just existing words recobbled together to sound slightly different. But search engines know it's the same thing, and we humans will start to figure out it's the same thing. What's your view in terms of the impact of AI on the whole influencer model? Because again, if we're in this for the long term, and if somebody's just starting out on this journey of I need to be a thought leader, eventually hopefully becoming an influencer, they're going to have to be playing this out through this evolution of AI, aren't they? Because this isn't going to go away anytime soon. So kind of how's that going to impact, do you think, in the short and then maybe even in the longer term?
That's a really good question. I think so many things are going to change in the next few years, like drastically change, right? It's really hard to even say what's going to happen 5 to 10 years from now. I think what AI does is that it accelerates one's ability to learn and understand themselves. I think a lot of building your personal brand and becoming a thought leader, I think it's less to do with other people. By what I mean by that is like competition. I think it has more to do with yourself. And what I love about AI is that it helps me articulate and understand ideas that I have faster. And I think when you could apply that, like actually apply that, not just intellectually understand things and regurgitate things, which is what a lot of people do, but actually apply it and experience it and get and create real transformations, right? Because that's ultimately what everybody's trying to do in this marketplace today anyways, right? That's what's economically valuable today, is helping people transform, helping people change. And if you could do that, and you could use AI to speed up your ability to do that, I think that's how you could become massively successful in today's market.
And so it becomes a tool to enable rather than being the end game. Feels like there's a nice way that it kind of fits in the system here. So if you have your process and you've got your patients and you've agreed, okay, I'm not necessarily looking to, hit the finish line at the end of this year. It could be a few years hence. So I'm bought into the long game. Then AI kind of becomes a bit of a supporter in that journey, maybe to kind of infill, and critique some of those ideas that you might have for the particular niche that you're trying to work with here. So yeah, it's a supporter and an enabler rather than the end game and the kind of this kind of golden nugget, as it were. It's kind of, it's only a supporting role by the sounds of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it kind of gives the person superpowers in a sense, right? Minus all the conversations people are having about what's accurate, what's not, etc. Like, you have to use it to your discretion. And it's not something you just like, hey, I'm going to plug in something, I'm going to copy and paste it kind of thing, which is what I think a lot of people are doing, which in my opinion is just like a lazy way to do it. In reality, it does help you understand your ideas better. And that all is contributing to your differentiating factor, because you're essentially living in a place where it's a really crowded place. It's like a lot of the same. So if there's a lot of the same, you need to stand out. You need to build a brand. You need to be memorable. So that has to do with being able to package up your ideas in a way that people want to consume it, that makes it more palatable, that makes it more tasty, right? And AI does that beautifully and so affordably that anybody that wants to be a subject matter expert or wants to be a thought leader or, a guru in their industry can do it. It just depends how badly you want to do it, right? It's like everyone has access to the gym, everyone has access to a basketball or all of these fundamental items that are commonly available. But the person that actually is dedicated to doing that day and night to the most extent, they're the ones that are going to be reaping all the benefits.
And that, I mean, never a truer word was spoken. I mean, that is it, isn't it? Really, it's the commitment. It's the knowing that almost it's like a calling. It's like, you have to do this. This isn't just you wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to become an influencer or thought leader. You kind of know it, don't you? It's a head and heart thing. It pulls you in that direction rather than it's just an airy kind of dream or idea. You kind of know it at your fundamental core, don't you? If this is going to be a thing. And is that kind of where all these kind of skills and attributes kind of come from, because you've got to really believe it, haven't you? If there's any kind of doubt in your mind that this is the journey for you, you're going to get found out by yourself very, very quickly, aren't you? I think the only way you can really embrace this, and I'm sure, thinking about Nikki and Neil and, Kimberly and others, if you probably were to ask them, what is the core thing about this that's kind of got me here? It's probably about commitment and passion for the journey, isn't it? Rather than just the destination. You've got to love that journey. Gary Vee talks a lot about this, doesn't he? He's saying the only way he could do what he does is by just living it and breathing it every single day. You can't just switch this thing on and off, can you? Did you find that as a bit of a pattern with the people you work with?
Yeah, it's one of those things like what you're saying is that's exactly what it is. It's like you have to have the passion. It's that stupid cliche of like you got to love what you do kind of thing, but and that's true because it's not always going to be easy. There's going to be lots of difficult times, and the only way to get to those difficult times is if you really actually love it and enjoy it, and that's something that's really a part of you. And that becomes what people are searching for, right? It's like they're trying to figure out their meaning in life. They're trying to figure out their purpose in life and all that. And I think that's something that you create. You give it meaning. You create your purpose, right? So when you find that thing you really enjoy doing, then you could figure out a way to do that thing in a way that is going to make a positive impact, not just for yourself, not just for, the people around you, but for the community and, ultimately for the planet, ultimately for the people. And when you can figure out what that is, that's what really starts to drive you.
There it is, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, how much does community play a part in this? Because I guess as an influencer, you're looking for advocates. It is great forging that pathway, either by yourself or with the support of somebody like AJ. But at the same time, if you en route can start to be building a community, and those community members then become advocates, they start to share your content consistently. They clearly buy into the same values, so they're kind of like-minded souls. They're kind of almost on that journey with you, aren't they? Does this play a significant part in becoming an influencer or knowing that you have an influencer brand when you see that kind of advocacy? Because otherwise it can be quite a lonely journey, can't it?
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote of, if a tree falls in a forest, no one's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. I think brands are the same way. If no one's paying attention to you, does it really exist? Right? So when you have a community that's paying attention or that has that brand in the back of their head or in their head, that's what makes it relevant. That's what makes it real. So I think that plays such a significant part, even for artists back in the days, like Walt Disney, right? When he created his cartoons, his content, people paid attention to it. People loved it. And that's what resulted in them eventually coming to his theme parks. So I think what a lot of people today are trying to be like, the next Walt Disney / Steve Jobs, and they're trying to create their own media company, and they want people to pay attention to the art that they're creating. And yeah, you do need a community for that. So I think that plays a big role.
Does that start, do you think, early in the journey then? So, if I wanted to become an influencer in the definition that we're using here, and I produce a bit of content, I've been doing it for a few months, I'm starting now to see, there's a few people kind of listening, I'm getting a bit of engagement, not a huge amount, but then I start to kind of factor in, even at this very early juncture, the idea of community. So I start to give maybe little incentives or rewards, or I start to invite my followers rather than the general public to little kind of private events, be it LinkedIn live audio or something that I host on my website or something like that. Do you see that happening early in the journey, or do you need to get to some kind of critical mass first before that becomes relevant?
I think it's in between early and like mid part of the journey. Like for example, when I was building Kimberly's brand, there was a time where I was like, hey, it'd be cool to have like a little book club. And we started a Facebook group and invited people into it. And at first it was hundreds of people. And then over time it became like 20,000 people. And all of these women, it was primarily women that were in this group. I started to notice how they're engaging with each other. And it was really a fascinating experience, because a brand is like a living, breathing organism. And it's like all these people have that brand in their mind, and then they're creating content within that brand. And that plays such a huge role. When we talk about return on attention created, ROAC, you're creating attention, and then you're creating opportunities for other people to create attention for you as well, right? In your branded world, whether they're clicking the share button or the bookmark button, or they're adding a comment, or they're having these conversations within your branded world, that plays such a powerful part. That's what's going to get it seen by people. That's what's going to make more people discover it, right? Is when they discover it from people that are already in your tribe, your community, or whatever. So if you could create a place where they could congregate together and interact with each other, they start to develop friendships with each other. And when they start to develop friendships with each other in your branded world, it just makes your brand much more stronger.
And then I guess will there be a lot of examples then of spin-offs where you then see real world events, you see conferences, you see online symposiums, you see, a whole bunch of stuff, courses, more books, obviously in Kimberly's example there, lots more books. And, I guess it kind of, the spin-off then is that you can start to then realize some of the other stuff, because it's very much driven by the community rather than just, hey, we're going to keep pushing stuff out. You then sense what the community's asking for and then respond, which again is pure marketing, isn't it? Feels a lot more inclusive than that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, like they're essentially supporting you, right? Like, and it becomes beautiful when you're trying to launch a new product, because now you have an existing community that you could get immediate feedback from, right? Not only will they be your first customers in supporting your new products endeavor, but they'll also contribute feedback to where you could modify the product before you start releasing it to a wider audience, right? So all of those little things, like whether it's the next book that you're doing, or it's a course that you're doing, or it's the piece of content that you're pushing out, having a community does help into growing you at a much more accelerated way. How to create that, or when to start on that, like I said, in the beginning to the middle of your journey, as you start to get stuff out there, as you start to figure out what your area of interests are, then you'll start to see people congregate with that interest and then want to push that to others.
Just feels so good, this, doesn't it? You just want to do it. I cannot imagine anyone listening or watching this thinking, no, I don't really fancy that. That's not really a very good thing. If you've got a story to tell, or you've got a brand that you want to showcase, or you're just proud of the journey that you're on, there's something in this for everybody, isn't there? Even if they don't go for the full-on in neon lights, the word influencer above their name, even at a micro level, there's something in this for everybody, isn't there? And I'm a devout introvert. I really, really am. I mean, I'm so internal in the way I process the world, and yet I love this stuff. And so if I'm buying into this idea, then surely for everybody else, this must be really exciting. Is there a downside here at all? Is there a negative associated with this?
Well, in a sense, like, you make a good point. I think everybody does need to do it, whether you're trying to become a big influencer, or even if you work in the corporate environment. Like, I have clients that are corporate brands, where we're helping the leadership team within the organization become thought leaders. Because, like I was saying earlier in this conversation, that how you see people online augments how you see them in real life already. So whether you're trying to move up the corporate ladder, whether you're trying to start your own company, whether you're a small mom and pop shop, if you want to be known, if you want people to pay attention to you, and if you want them to buy your products and services, you need to have a presence online. You need to be on social media. You need to develop a personal brand. And yes, you could get known faster than ever before. You could accumulate attention over time as you post your content on these different platforms. And the negative part of it is that if you mess up, if you screw up with things, it can impact your reputation. But that's something that's always been around. But in the analog world, or the traditional world, that kind of messaging just didn't happen fast before, where if somebody did something bad or something, like, you wouldn't know about it probably. Whereas today, if you did something bad, everybody would know about it. At the same time, having said all that, I'm sure everybody could think of someone that has been canceled within the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years who was uncanceled, right? Even the worst of them have gotten canceled and have gotten uncanceled. So as far as a negative impact, there could be ones in the short run, but if you're ultimately playing the long game and you're changing and doing things for the better, it could still work for you.
Yeah, it keeps coming around again, doesn't it? This whole thing about patience. If you've got patience, you're loving the dream, you're on the journey, you've got that desire to do this day in, day out, with little support, undoubtedly, at some points, and you're going to continuously listen as you build that community of the engaged people around you. Yeah, it just sounds like this is the future of marketing communications, really, in all senses and all sectors and all sizes of business, and for individuals too. Sounds really, really good. I want to keep people connected with you, AJ, because I think, obviously you're here talking a huge amount of valuable sense, I think, for all of us. And I've picked up some really, really good tips through this conversation that I'm going to go away and really think about quite some length. How would you like people to connect with you? I'm going to put some details in the description below for this particular episode, but where should people go next?
Yeah, you could find me on Instagram, AJ the Digital Maestro. I'll be sharing more content in there. And I also have a book coming out pretty soon. It's called Guru Inc. So if you're interested in that, then definitely follow me on Instagram so that you'll be the first to know.
Brilliant. And we should all definitely be doing that. AJ, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really, really fascinating conversation. I think we've gone in directions that we weren't expecting there as well. So that's always healthy, isn't it, really? But I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate you having me.